The spiritual activity that we are witnessing in the current moment is unprecedented. Never in human history have we ever witnessed such a manifestation of these types of things. And ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, the stage is being set. We might not be able to know when the rapture is going to take place, and there are no dates that we can set. And if you meet anybody who says they have the date, hey, the rapture is going to happen on this day, walk away from them. They might as well be Jim Jones and have you drink some Kool-Aid. Okay? It's fake. It's a complete farce. Don't listen to them, because the word doesn't give an indication of when that day is going to be. And the word gives us, all the indications that the word gives us are concerning seasons and periods of time. So what should we do as believers? As believers, we should look for the signs that the stages are being set for the things we know the scriptures is going to tell us is going to happen. Then you begin to realize we're getting closer. In 1930, when you would look at the area that the nation of Israel is right now, you would think, wow, this is desolate. This is swampland. This is ugly, right? We have record of Mark Twain coming and visiting in the 1800s and literally just calling it an abandoned place, that literally from one point to the other, he couldn't even see a single person, that the place was just completely abandoned and desolate, right? Isn't it funny how the word of God actually predicted that to us? Do you know that if you go into the Old Testament, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, you get a very distinct outline that God designed the land of Israel to never be fruitful so long as his people were not in the land. And to this very day, anytime you have a non-Jew who is occupying a portion of Israel, not under the supervision of Israel, the land just completely goes kaput. And if you don't believe me, go and look at some of the Palestinian Authority controlled areas. It is a complete armpit. It is. It's just ugly. It's just really, really bad. But the reality of it is, God blesses the land so long as his ancestrally chosen people are occupied in it. The Bible told us that would be the case, right? Literally, the Bible told us that that would be the situation at hand, and that was what was going on. So think about it like this. Understand that prior to 1948, there was no such thing as a nation of Israel. Now, the problem with that is, if you're studying Bible prophecy and you're somebody like Darby, for example, who kicked and screamed and said all of this stuff is going to happen, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, they called him a nut. He was cuckoo. He was absolutely crazy, because there is no such thing as a nation of Israel, right? You have to have a nation of Israel in order for things to happen with Israel, right? But if there is no nation of Israel and there is no people with a national identity, there is no government, there is no space or land that they occupy, how in the world can you have anything in Bible prophecy come true if the nation doesn't exist? Well, guess what? God solved that problem in 1948, didn't he? 75 years ago, God solved that problem, and he reestablished the nation of Israel in their homeland. Then you had people say in 1948, well, impossible. Israel doesn't have possession of Jerusalem. How in the world can anything happen near the Temple Mount area? What happened in the 60s, right? God did it. God did it miraculously. And in the 70s, the land that was being taken by Israel, God's ancestrally chosen people. Funny thing is now, the next phase that people are getting into in this discussion is, well, all right, I believe that. God is dealing with Israel directly. We know that in the last days, but there's another problem. How in the world can we even begin to see the beginnings of any type of abomination that causes desolate if there is no temple? There's no temple. There has to be a temple in order for that to happen. What have we been watching over the last 20 years, right? The Temple Institute, who has every single thing necessary. You've got the heifers that they've got, literally they're teaching kids right now how to do sacrifices per the Bible, right? You have people right now in the Knesset that are calling for Israel to take control of the Temple Mount again, no longer allow the Jordanians to control it, so that they can take the portion of the Temple Mount that they are saying needs to have the temple built back onto it, and to give the freedom to the Jews to be able to worship there again. Folks, look, We know we're getting closer to that time because we're beginning to see the stages being set for it all, right? You know we're getting closer to the time when you look at an area in Europe and you realize the alliances that exist among the nations here in Europe and in the Middle East, geopolitically speaking, can never allow the things that we read about in the Bible. I used to remember when people would laugh at the idea that Iran would become an enemy of Israel, or Iran would even become an enemy of the United States. People looked at that and said, what a complete joke. They said the same thing about Turkey. Did you know that when Israelis wanted to go on vacation, they would either go to the Sinai, Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, or they would go to Turkey, right? Now it's so bad that if you were to get on a Turkish air flight like I did many years ago, and you were to fly into Tel Aviv and you look at the map on their flight maps, it only gives you old school Goliath-based Palestinian names. Ancient names for portions of the country of Israel. You won't see any names like Jerusalem. You won't see any of those names. It's amazing how you'll see that. You'll see names given to cities by the Amalekites. That's how much of an enemy they've actually become. When you think about the idea that Russia, 15 years ago, that Russia would become friends with a nation like Iran and would begin to cooperate with them in Syria, as though Syria doesn't even exist and has now become an extension of both of those countries. I remember this one time where I made this prediction on Pastor's Perspective, based on what the Bible says, radio show that was actually solid at the time. And when I was on the radio during that time, I remembered making those predictions with Don Stewart and getting nasty letters from people. We actually got a letter. I got a letter from somebody in state prison that says that I was lucky that he was doing a life sentence, because if he wasn't, he would come out and kill me. Literally sent me that letter from state prison. Over what? Over me making a prediction concerning Iran and Russia and what was going to be happening there. It's that insane. It's that crazy, right? People got all riled up over it. I mean, just completely lost their minds. Just completely went berserk because they said it's an impossibility. What are we looking at right now? Who's even here? No one even really hears of Syria anymore. Syria is viewed as Russian sovereign territory. So it's also viewed in many ways as Iranian sovereign territory. There are no controversies tied with that. Look, Putin sat down almost 2 years ago with his generals in a very public security meeting, and he declared the western border of Syria against Israel. Right, that border, right there. He declared that border Russian sovereign territory. He calls it a Russian border. And he's talking about Syria. He's got all of his missile defense systems lined up all throughout Syria. Why? Because he's defending Russian assets. And Israel is respecting it as such and trying to develop a relationship with Russia that's amicable, just like the rest of the Middle East. When you begin to see what's going on with Russia's power beginning to grow and their influence with what's happening in Ukraine. Listen, the reason why Russia is being aggressive with Ukraine is to shut down the deep state elements that exist with the West that continues to influence foreign policy that centers in that area geopolitically speaking. That's why they have spent $400 billion, which is 3 times the overall military budget of Russia, to defeat Russia, and Russia is winning. Russia continues to win, right? Why? Because these people who are setting these foreign policies up are not reading their Bibles. And if they were reading their Bibles, they wouldn't do the things that they're actually doing right now. Think about how Russia has their hands in everything. When you look at China brokering some kind of a peace deal, right, that's going on in Iran with other nations, everybody thinks, wow, China's actually doing this. How in the world are they making this happening? And people don't realize China is doing it at the will of and the bequest of Russia. Russia's the one that's got their fingers all throughout the Middle East. Take a look at what's going on with Libya right now. When the United States orchestrated, in essence, the assassination of Gaddafi, and when that whole thing went down in Libya, remember, that civil war ensued, right? We know the story, what happened in Benghazi. You guys remember that whole story? When all of that happened under the Clinton Secretary of State nonsense, all the nonsense that she did, when that happened, there was a massive split in Libya, a massive civil war. A big civil war is still going on. And you know who's winning that civil war? The faction that is controlled by Russia. And the very moment that Russia completely has victory in that civil war, they will now control assets in the southern Mediterranean, which then gives them the ability to monitor their neighbors that are over to the east, right? Which of course is going to be Israel and the other neighbors that go there. And they're going to be able to monitor assets that continue to protect their interests as it relates to Greece and Italy and many other parts of Europe. And if you don't think that has something to do with what we know is going to happen in Ezekiel 38, you are crazy. You cannot look at this stuff and not see it happening. Folks, the stage is actually being set. I want you to get it, right? We're watching the stage being set, which tells us we are near that time. It doesn't give us the ability to set dates, but we know that we are beginning to see things orchestrated that have to happen after the church is raptured, which means the rapture has to happen soon. It has to happen sooner than later.